Are we live yet?
Good morning. This is a special call meeting of the Investment Committee of the County Employees Retirement System. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. And we start with the opening statement, please. Rick.
This is a special meeting of the County Employees Retirement System Board of Trustees Investment Committee. This meeting is being broadcast via video teleconference pursuant to KRS 61826 and may be viewed by the public at the Kentucky Public Pensions Authority offices located at 1260 Louisville Road in Frankfort, Kentucky. It is also being broadcast to the public live via Facebook. If you are speaking and are not appearing by video, please identify yourself before talking. If the video or audio broadcast is interrupted, we will attempt to reestablish a connection. If a connection cannot be reestablished within 30 minutes, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled to a later date.
Thank you. If we begin with the roll call. Sherry, would you do the roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Dr. Hackbart,
Here.
Mr. Cheatham,
Here.
Dr. Milkman, Mr. O'Mara,
Here.
and Ms. Pendergrass.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Are there any public comments? I believe there might be one. Is that correct, Sherry?
That is correct, sir, and I will read that now.
Please.
This is one that we received from Mary Ward, and it reads as follows. I may be asking the wrong question to the wrong group, but are there any plans or anything at all being mentioned about state employees' retirement raises? As far as I know, it's been 11 years. I believe the teacher's retirement does receive a cost of living every year. I know state employees received 2 big raises recently. I'm happy for them. I missed those. I've been retired almost 10 years. People working for my agency make double the salary I retired with. Again, I'm happy for them, but we are forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate those comments. This morning we basically have one topic, and that is strategic planning. It's a topic that we've been kind of associated with for the last year, but we've been, I guess, diverted to other topics for the most part. So we thought it'd be beneficial to have one special meeting just to have a thorough discussion of the strategic planning process, how we relate to KPPA, and also any special specifications that we want to include in the strategic plan for the investment committee as well as for C. So with that, I've asked for 2 presentations and discussion leaders this morning. I appreciate that very much. Ed Owens is going to provide sort of an overview and also discuss the activities of the KPPA and what they've been doing in terms of, I believe they've had a consultant assist them with their effort. And Betty's going to look all down in more details in terms of the potential factors and considerations we might want to include in our more detailed strategic plan for the investment committee as part of C. So Ed, if you would please take the lead in the discussion of the strategic planning process. Yes, question?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly, I know we get these comments from people from time to time, and a lot of people don't realize that in special call meetings we can't discuss anything other than what's on the agenda, but I just want to ask Sherry, I didn't catch her full name, Mary.
Last name was Ward, W-A-R-D.
I think we ought to at least acknowledge Mary's comment, and Ed, if you want to maybe draft a quick little note or something and send her.
That comment was focused on the K members, so that comment also ought to go to that board.
Yes, I just think we ought to acknowledge these people who take the time to ask the question. We may not be able to give them an answer, certainly not one they want to hear, but we ought to at least acknowledge them. So,
Excellent suggestion. Thank you for bringing that up. Ed, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hackbart, and I appreciate your calling this special meeting to speak to the strategic plan. As you mentioned, C has looked at the strategic planning process for almost a year. Every committee, save the investment committee, has reported out strategic planning objectives that they want to achieve over the next cycle. It's important now that Ryan is in place as the executive director, because there was a little bit of a lull in the process as Ryan came on board. Rightfully so, his staff wanted to make sure that they had his input as we move forward. So I do want to speak to the 6 items that we crafted for the investment committee to be part of the strategic planning process. And I do want to add 2 other items that, since this information was posted to board books, there have been conversations with members of the committee about other potential items that could be part of our process. And I want to make the committee fully aware of those conversations. The KPPA strategic planning process has boiled down to 4 organizational buckets. A bucket for governance, a bucket for organizational excellence, one for customer service delivery, and one for infrastructure and key resources. We thought it important, particularly in the investment committee, that we identify potential bucket items that would be in line with those that had been more broadly drawn by KPPA. There has been a lot of time, effort, and expense spent to develop this strategic plan, and we wanted to be in line with it to the extent that we could be. So for these 6 items that are listed, we also have listed what I'll call actionable dates. And these are recommended dates. There's nothing hard and fast about the dates, but I did want to know that, or to note for this group assembled, that we had given some thought as to when those items might be implementable. So we'll start with the governance bucket, and from investment, most of the operable things that we're going to have will fit in the governance bucket. And the first item is that we would work with the Office of Investments and the Office of the CFO to create and establish a senior risk officer, and we've labeled it here department. Certainly we want to start with a senior risk officer before we get a department. But I think it's important that as we think about the enterprise risk infrastructure that we build at KPPA, that it is inclusive of risk. And I do know that there has been a compliance position that most recently was housed in the investment office, and there's discussion as to whether or not it should remain housed there or be housed elsewhere. This senior risk officer is different from the compliance officer. The compliance officer role is more of a fact-checking role to ensure that policies and procedures have been followed. I think our vision for the senior risk officer would be more policy-oriented to ensure that there is a operable risk infrastructure for the entirety of KPPA. So that's the first item that we would like to have discussion around, and the tentative date that was put toward that was fourth quarter of 2025. I know that there was an effort to secure additional resources from the Department of Personnel that may have been able to be utilized for the creation of this spot. We weren't able to secure those additional spots yet, but I am hopeful and that KPPA will continue to seek those additional resources, because this is an area of vital importance. The next is that we establish through our investment policy statement some guidelines for how we manage assets internally. We have 4 professionals in our investment office who do a phenomenal job. We are blessed to have such strategic talent there. But today, we're managing roughly 30% of our assets internally, and I think from the investment policy statement standpoint, there needs to be a robust discussion as to how much more we can manage internally with only 4 individuals. There are positions that are available to be filled, and to say, is there a rough ratio number that we would utilize to say, with 4 people, we would do this amount. With additional people, we could potentially do additionally more. We have an investment committee regular meeting scheduled for August the 28th. The IPS, as it has been reconstituted, will be presented to the committee then, and you'll see some of the ideas around guardrails for internally managed assets there. So we had tentatively put third quarter of 2024 for the opportunity to have this discussion, and we're tracking that with our IPS being discussed by the committee at the end of this month, and then by the board in September. Thirdly, we want to better define the role of the investment consultant in terms of how they bring new investment strategies and managers to us, and ultimately to see if we couldn't develop a loosely regarded policy as to what we would expect in terms of, from our investment consultant, how they would make new investment managers known to us, and new investment strategies known to us as well. Under organizational excellence, we've defined strengthening and standardizing the investment performance reporting, just to ensure that we get the maximum transparency that we can. And the investment office does a tremendous job here. This is only to enhance what is already a very good product. And we believe that there are tweaks on the edge of that could enhance it. And again, under organizational excellence, to speak to whether or not we need a benchmark established for the assets that we're managing internally, so that we have a sense of how well are we doing with the assets that we're managing internally. And again, we've got first quarter of 2025 for those items, and certainly we could go beyond that. Under the infrastructure and key resources, I've already talked about the senior risk officer department, but I do want to stress that I think it's important that as we're viewing this, that we view this larger than a single individual, and a department could be as few as 3 people. But I do think in order for us to get an entire enterprise risk infrastructure built, that it's going to be beyond the capability of a single individual. The 2 additional items that have been brought to the fore since this was published. One relates to full funding. And if we can establish a goal for something short of full funding, that will ensure that we remain on the trajectory that we're on. And what had been discussed was that we could say that by 2040 that we could reach 75% funding. Now, the actuarial projections from 2023 say that by 2040 we'll be at 76% funded. So to say that we're at least at 75 just maintains the trajectory that we're on, so that we understand that full funding for us will be in the 2049 year. The second issue that was raised relates to portfolio risk tolerance. And through our Sharpe ratio, our risk-weighted returns are as good as anyone in the country. We take a small amount of risk in our portfolio, and we've been able to turn that into outsized returns. That's phenomenal, and it speaks to the work that the investment office has done. What the question that was raised was, as we move toward better funding, between the 65% funding and possibly being 80% funding, would that be an opportunity for the committee and ultimately the board to take a look at whether or not there could be a little more risk injected into the portfolio so that we could get additional return from that? But to understand that the prudentness that this board has taken by not taking additional risk, as we are 50 and 60% funded, is absolutely where we want to be. But as we move forward and think about becoming better funded, it is a conversation that the committee and the board, I believe, will have robustly as to whether or not we should look at that. But those are the items, Mr. Chair, that the committee had thought were important for the investment committee to put on the table and to put in the buckets that KPPA had established through their strategic planning process.
I think your last item, I think, is quite interesting, and that is risk tolerance. How do we actually assess that, and what's a reasonable position to be, and how do we really define that, and so forth? I think
And measure it.
measure it, right? It's a useful concept, but in terms of practical implementation, I'm not sure it's that clear. If you talk about that from an individual viewpoint, an individual is looking at his or her, retirement plans and so forth, and risk tolerance becomes a typical question. And oftentimes that question is asked, what's your risk tolerance on a scale of 1 to 10? Oh, maybe a 5, without a lot of thoughtful consideration of what that may actually mean in terms of how that person's portfolio will be at the end of retirement and so forth. And the same thing applies, I think, to us in terms of our goals. How do we really define what that should be? Are there metrics that we can consider to give us a better understanding of the implications and as we define our risk tolerances? Because it's an important decision that we make as a committee, I think. But I think it's an issue that we ought to take a look at in more detail. And maybe it's something we could have our consultants spend some time with us at a session to talk about.
One of the things Ed and I talked about the other day, Sharpe ratio, we've spent an awful lot of time talking about Sharpe ratio, which is, I understand it, is basically a unit of measure per risk taken.
Right.
Which, that number's been great.
That's fine.
But standard deviation, to me, on an asset by asset basis, gives you a look inside as to what kind of volatility risk that you're dealing with each particular asset class. I think that at a minimum has to be part of that risk formula that we look at. And I think that's one of the things that I want to see in the new IPS.
Right.
It's not just discussion over return, but levels of risk that we're willing to take in order to generate that return. So I'd really, I think I mentioned to Ed, I'd really like to get Wilshire to give us a not necessarily a presentation, but a white paper specific to that discussion for us to look at.
And I think if we have a risk officer, that person might be able to help us focus our attention and to analyze what that really implies for us as a board and so forth. So it's something that we probably have been somewhat deficient in terms of keeping our eyes on that issue. The other point I think you made, Ed, was important, and that is I kind of like the idea of having kind of a monitoring goal toward full funding. And I think an intermediate point, rather than 2049, that seems, at least in my lifespan, that's a long time away. Probably irrelevant many times over. But something more of an intermediate goal, it kind of helps us, I think, focus on how are we doing? Are we getting there? And so forth. And that also has applications in terms of risk tolerance as well. I mean, obviously, I think, Ed, as you mentioned, as we move toward more fuller funding, we might be able to tweak our risk tolerance because we're going to have the capacity to assure beneficiaries that the funds will be there for the retirement funds and so forth. And we might be able to do something there as we go along. And I think having a staff person that would help us focus our attention on that would be really valuable. I like that idea.
And I 100% agree with that. The one thing that I would interject there is, and we had a little bit of discussion about that several meetings ago, is, over that same period of time through 2049, we're going to be needing to dip into these funds in order to make benefit payments. So that opens you up to the issue of sequence of return risk, which works the other direction. We may be getting closer to full funding, but as we need to dip into that needs to mitigate that risk level as well. So all that needs to be looked at, which between a compliance officer and a risk officer, I think that's going to be a bigger and bigger issue for us going forward. I'm glad we're looking at it at this stage of the game.
So I've also asked Betty to share her thoughts. I know it's something she's been focusing on for probably more than the rest of us. And
Yeah, I've been working on it 2 years.
I know. and it's been a priority for you. And so I appreciate if you maybe share your thoughts that you've developed and suggested over time. And again, I think we've probably had kind of, because of other activities in our meetings and so forth, we really haven't had time to have a good conversation about this strategic plan. And I know, Betty, you've given a lot of thought to it. So if you'd share your thoughts about focusing more on in terms of the investment committee, proper, maybe even C and so forth, I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
I'm hesitating because I'm sharing a screen and
Okay,
doing some
do that.
technology
No problem.
stuff here.
Right.
I'm not chewing gum, that's the good news. I want to take a quick step back to where I had hoped we would go with the CERS strategic plan. I have always considered that the strategic plan for the CERS board was focused solely on governance and solely on what the trustees themselves wanted to accomplish with this separate board. The first year and a half, we were very busy on just trying to get organized, and that took all of our attention. So I didn't worry about strategic planning at the beginning, although I put it on Ed's list June 28th, 2021, as we were hiring him. But what I structured for CERS, and what you see on the screen is the table of contents from where I hope we will end up with for the CERS strategic plan. After KPPA hired their consultant and started working on theirs, I have still thought that the CERS board strategic plan was in addition to that administrative strategic. It should not at all conflict. It might overlap a little, but it is in collaboration, running side by side. And what I'd like to do is to, we talked about the issue of full funding. The actuarial committee has actually come up with some strategic goals, including full funding. What I asked each committee to do was to develop its own strategic plan for the goals that it wanted to establish for that particular area of responsibility for the board. And the idea was that we bring all of those goals together, right here. We bring all those goals together into the strategic plan for governance for the entire CERS board. And I divvied our responsibilities up by the various committees that we have. So actuarial was one of the first to put together their list. The structure of the template, if you will, has a primary actuarial goal, and then it has certain objectives that drill down a little bit, not real far into the weeds, but a little bit. And their objective C was to attain 100% funded status in a reasonable period. Now, when we bring the strategic plan to the full board to discuss, we might drill down to that one and say, we want something more specific than a reasonable period. That would tie in with the discussion that we just brainstormed a little bit about how we want to handle that collaboration when we get to the board level. So that's where we're going to head. What I'm going to try to do today is focus on the investment template. The items that I have in this particular template are only placeholders. Let's see. Sherry might have to, here we go. Yes, I'm going to fill this out as we brainstorm and talk today. These are placeholders. There's nothing about it. This was just an example of how we could go. So now I want to go back to the board books. All right, what I put in board books was this same triangle that we've been using in the investment committee, just as background. You've seen this before. We've talked about it at length. I also pulled in that slide on fiduciary responsibilities that we talked about in the training session because I wanted to see how we were doing. These are what we should be doing in terms of our fiduciary responsibility. So I think that flows into strategic planning. Then I gave you the template, and then the next thing I have are some strategic questions. Now these are thoughts off the top of the head. They're not in any priority order. They're just a prompt for discussion. One of the things that Dr. Hackbert and I have discussed at length that I think merits some additional discussion is how much of our incoming resources should come from investment earnings as opposed to the contribution from both employees and employers. So to try to answer that question, I went to this format to look at our historical financial statements. And this is where Ryan and Mike and I are going to get together and see if we can come up with a better way to pull some historic numbers together. The volatility in the net investment income skewed the percentages all over the place. I don't think you can look at these percentages of the total. Notice that the total additions is 100%. So in 2023, we had close to 50% of our, if you add 8.9 and 42 together, that's our contribution effort. And then we had 48% from net investment appreciation and investment earnings. So, but that is all over the board. If you look at 2022, it's very weird. We have 200% from employer contributions and a negative 200% from investment earnings, and that's because of the fluctuation in the fair market value of this. So I didn't have time to go through and try to come up with another way to do this. So that's where Mike and Ryan and I are going to take another look at it. So I wouldn't suggest that we try to hone in on a specific percentage, but we talk about whether or not that might be a strategic goal that we want to discuss in terms of our strategic plan.
I think that's an interesting point, Betty, as we've talked, and that is, again, just looking at in a sort of a more of a simple manner. Okay, we have employer contributions, cash flow, employee contributions, cash flow. Those cash flows are relatively stable for any fiscal year, or even in the long term. We can make, the actuary can make assumptions about new employees and salary levels and so forth. That's probably the information we can have a pretty good feel for. And it seems that given that, we also know our payouts probably are pretty well determined, what our retired employee requirements are in terms of outflows. And there's going to be a question is what should be the gap between current inflows and current outflows that we have to make up from our portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the role that may play in terms of investment policy is that may determine what percent or what relative portion of our assets we ought to be investing in what we might call liquid or modestly liquid assets to meet that additional cash flow we need to meet our total obligations.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be fixed income, it could be equities, dividend producing equities and so forth that we can project that cash flow requirement year by year on into the future, at least generally speaking.
Those charts are in the
Right.
annual.
And it's something I think we could give greater consideration to. It's kind of a hybrid between our actuarial analysis and our investment analysis. Yes.
Well, it goes to what we were talking about a few minutes ago.
Right.
You know, we are going to need a cash stream, for
Right.
lack of a better way to put it. And whether that comes from liquid, selling off of liquid investments, or whether that's coming from dividend or interest.
Exactly. Right.
To some extent, obviously, is going to be determined by where interest rates go over the next 20, 30 years. I think, everybody's probably in agreement that they're probably higher now than they're probably going to be for the next 10 years. To some extent, we need to take advantage of that. And I think we've done that with some of the asset allocation changes. But the numbers that you're looking for as far as what's going to have to be provided from the investments based on the actuarial assumptions are out there.
Mm-hmm.
So when you take that and marry it up with what kind of income stream we're generating now into the current asset allocation, you can kind of start getting a picture of where we are and where we may have to adjust going forward.
Right. And I thought was that, in effect, as far as a strategic plan, that seems to be a logical component of our strategic plan in terms of the basic numbers that we're looking to, and that's going to change over time. And that as we become closer to full funding, we can rely more heavily on investment income and less so on employer and employee contributions, and we, at least, I think, to have a general understanding and in fact some guidelines in that regard could be helpful to us to have that picture.
I think a discussion specific to that, and we're probably a little bit premature from the standpoint of not needing, to be generating large sums of cash flow out of the investments to pay benefits, but that day will be coming. One of the things that we've got to probably keep on the table is, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can do it through your investments, or you may go out and purchase that income. I'm seeing that go on in the private sector a lot with funded pension plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I say, it's sort of background information that as we look at our asset allocations and so forth, if we have a general understanding year by year on into the future, at least for the next 5 or 10 years, I think that would be really valuable to this committee to have that background in terms of having discussions about asset allocation and liquidity and those kinds of things. It plays a role in our decision process, but it also, obviously, it comes from our actuarial.
GRS ought to be able, pretty quickly and easily generate that out both in table and graphical form, so we get a good visual idea what that's going to look like.
They do a cash flow analysis every time because they have to decide whether or not the discount rate is high enough to generate positive cash flow through the entire system. And so I'd like to see that cash flow and see that point in time where GRS is saying that we have to pull investments to pay benefits. For me, it's hard to understand how we get to 75% funded status, but we've used up investments to pay beneficiaries. I'm not sure how that works. So I'd like to see that analysis. I come back to this cash flow report that we see on a regular basis and look at, my personal benchmark when I'm looking at inflows versus outflows, I'm trying to identify how much of this net investment income have we used to pay benefits in this particular quarter. And that's where I'm tracking are we using investment principal as opposed to dividends and interest. So when we get to this net contribution income, and this is not in board books, you'll only be able to see it on the screen here. We've got net contributions. I'm giving away some of the information for the Finance Committee, but we've got 151 net contributions. We had net investment income of 217. So we didn't use all of it to pay benefits. And then I look at also the unrealized gain when we had negative on that net contribution line. The realized gain, that was cash. We decided to sell stuff and take a gain or a loss as it may be. So how much of that did we have to tap into? And then I look at the unrealized gain and I'm not interested in touching that because it's not real yet. It's not a deposit ticket into the checking account.
Yeah, and at the same time, the unrealized loss is not part of it either.
It's included in that one line with gains and
it's
losses.
on there, but from the standpoint of cash flow and what you're using to pay benefits, it'd be like you and I owning a piece of rental property. And we're collecting that rent, maybe we're spending and living off of it, but the value of that property is going up and down every day.
Sure, yeah. So I'm not looking at
So
that
anything,
to cover
anything
expenses.
that's unrealized is just
It's
paper
nice.
at this point.
It's great.
It's nice to look at.
It's nice
Makes you feel
looking.
good
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
Sometimes it does.
That's how I look at the cash flows. I also believe that we need to keep in mind that when we do an asset allocation that decreases our yield, decreases what we expect we're going to earn in investments, that we are eventually, maybe not in the same year, but we're eventually going to ask employers to pay a higher contribution rate, i.e. taxpayers are going to have to pay it a higher rate. So I also look at this mix between contributions and investment earnings as how much do we want to make off Wall Street versus how much are we going to go to Main Street and ask them to cough up. So I'm going to go back to our investment committee schedule here. So I think we can agree that objective is an objective that we want to put in the investment committee.
It's something that we can continually monitor and understand. I think
Okay.
that's the important thing.
All right, let me,
So I think as we look, and we probably ought to be doing that for, at least up to 5 years into the future, so that, things change, but at least we have a pretty good picture that we're okay, and we know where the funds are going to be coming from to meet our obligations. And maybe I'm thinking a 5-year period would be reasonable, and I think that could be a continuous sort of dynamic analysis that could be carried out. So we feel relatively confident to the degree we can because of fluctuations. And related to that, I've been given some thought that maybe we ought to think of it to meet the investment income component of our outflow. Whether we should think about as in our portfolio sort of two components. One component would to meet that obligation, and the other component would be for long term. I think we could do something of that nature. I'm not sure exactly about that, but it strikes me as probably being kind of logical.
It is, and that kind of goes to the what I mentioned earlier, and what I'm reading and seeing going on again in the private sector,
Right.
private defined benefit, not defined contribution, is some of these plans are taking dollars and purchasing that income stream. When I say purchasing that income stream, they're basically going to an insurance company and saying, hey, you guarantee, almost like buying a group annuity, for lack of a better way to put it, okay? And say, all right, here it is, and we ain't gotta worry about it.
Right.
And that allows you to take those other dollars, that other bucket,
And be,
and be a little bit.
and your risk tolerance can be more
Exactly.
relevant there. Right.
And that's, that's something, like I said, I think we're a ways away from needing to even look at that, just because at this point, even if all we were generating was a 2 or 3% income stream off the investments, that's more than enough probably to cover what we've got
Right.
to pay benefits.
Exactly, right.
But at some point in time, particularly while rates are up, it's worth having that discussion and looking at that. Because, it lowers your risk profile overall.
Right.
And, it something that I would suggest we put on the table for ongoing discussion. for lack of a better
I think
word.
these are the kinds of questions that we could benefit from having discussions with our consultant, right? I mean,
Exactly.
just numbers coming from our consultant, we can get those ourselves, but I think these more fundamental questions, I think, is where we would really like to have support and discussions with them from their perspective. And for example, trends that you just mentioned, that would be useful to look at as well, right? And what the opportunities are, right?
so what I'm doing on our investment template is doing some preliminary wording. This definitely doesn't have to be final, but for instance, on objective A, I've added monitor the ratio of investment earnings versus contribution resources to evaluate the health of the CERS system. Under the first measure, what is the investment component of the outflow? How much of benefits are paid from investments? And then on measure 3, I've got should CERS use insured options, and I think that's the technical alternative there for what you were talking about, Lyle, to fund a component of benefit payments. Is there any other measure that we want to include in this particular objective?
Mr. O'Meara has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
Don't worry. I guess I need some clarification. So you're talking about annuities as an option for a defined revenue stream. And what is the difference between that and, say, laddered bond maturities? Wouldn't that give you the same thing without going to a third party for-profit entity?
I don't know that I'm necessarily qualified to sit here and answer that question, Bill, other than to say any kind of ladder bond portfolio, depending on what interest rates are going to do, is going to go up and down in value. Whereas, you know, if you've got a quality insurer now, you know, it's like getting a AA rated bond issued by a AAA rated company. You don't have to worry about that.
May I address that?
Oh, yeah.
So the insured structure is what I think of as like a guaranteed investment contract or structured portfolio. So I used to bid these out all the time. So Bill, your core question is treasury matching or bond matching is really a fixed income strategy. What I think Lyle is referring to is, again, more of a guaranteed investment contract. So you put in a bid investment, you can put these securities. It's not just fixed income. It can be other asset class, private equity, public equity, etc. And you get permitted investments, and then you would go out and shop it. And basically, this is a permitted investment. This is how much money. This is why I need it. And then they would give you the best rate back. So I bid many of those. So fundamentally, the answer is it's the fixed income versus you can allow any type of asset class to go into that investment contract.
And the contract gives us a cash flow stream that we could then dedicate to a group of beneficiaries to make sure we have their defined benefit annuities covered.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly how they work in retirement plans, but again, I bid these out a lot for local governments and other entities. So you can do one of two things. You can say asset class, and this is the cash flow for which I'm going to need it, right? Give a cash flow stream. You can give bullet payments. So you really are just structuring kind of an investment vehicle to suit, you can't pick everything. You can't pick the rate, the asset class, and cash flow, but you pick a combination of those, and then you bid it out based on rate, or you can tell them what a target rate is and how much money can you give me quickly. So you can do all those kind of structures. Some markets are liquid, some are not. Some you get a lot of bids, you won't. But the structure that I believe you're talking about, Lyle, that is not uncommon to go out to a third party. You got risk in that third party. You're underwriting them, but you can structure those products kind of how you want. But in this instance, any type of asset class that would be in our investment policy, and then, hey, we need this much money over time, and who would perform the best under that scenario.
There is a retirement. Neil Ramsey talked about this, and I can't remember the technical term. I'll go back into the minutes and see if I can find where we targeted a liability stream, and we acquire specific investments that will throw off the income stream for that specific set of beneficiaries.
It's LDI investing.
I'm sorry?
LDI, liability-driven investment.
Yes, that's it.
Bill, does that answer your question?
It helps a lot. I think I might be reading your schedule on page 9 wrong, but it looked like to me we're short between 100 and 200 million each year that has to be drawn down from either income from our investments or the capital investments. So I think we already have a hole, And so we could talk about whether we're reading it right and what that hole has been historically, to have a further conversation on what kind of revenue stream we would need with some kind of vehicle like this.
Bill, I think what Dr. Hackberg alluded to earlier, that the hole that you're referring to is designed to be there, and it's going to be a bigger and bigger hole, if you will, going forward, because it's designed to do that in order to pay benefits. We just need to have a plan for the best way to generate that income to fill that hole that still allows us to continue to grow assets at an efficient level.
And I understand if you took low risk to cover the cash flow, then you reconsider the risk level for the rest of the portfolio. I believe is what we're all talking about here, correct?
I think so.
I think that you captured it, yes, right. That was sort of the idea.
Right, thanks.
Two, not really, but sort of quasi two portfolios. I mean, one to deal with the cash flow requirements and the other for longer term investment.
And we may want to ask the investment staff how they're approaching that and managing it now. We might be reinventing the wheel that's already there. Maybe at another meeting
I think
to dive into this issue.
I think for purposes of the strategic plan, we just need, one of the things in the strategic plan is we need to have a plan to how we want to attack that hole, if you will, going forward over the next 5 to 10 year cycle.
And I guess what I'm saying is they may have a plan. We just need to let them have the opportunity to share that with us.
I think you're right, Bill. And I think, that, as Lyle said, I think as far as, in my thought process, the strategic plan is just guidelines of how we deal with these issues, and that we do have a plan to deal with it.
Exactly.
We bring them out on the table. That's something that we have to consider and think about as we move forward.
So if, Steve Wheeler has something he wants to add.
Yeah, just quickly to Bill's point, part of the asset allocation presentation that Wilshire and staff put together when the new asset allocation was adopted, one of those considerations is the yield of the portfolio, which really is at any point in time is the best indication of what your future cash flow is going to be on that. And that was one of the recommendations of the portfolio. We look at that yield component of the portfolio, and those tend to be primarily the fixed income investments. We're cognizant of, Wilshire did a good job of taking the actuarial reports and putting them into that cash flow analysis that they did on the asset liability study as part of the asset allocation presentation, and ensuring that we were increasing the yield on the portfolio in the recommended changes to the asset allocation target. So that is something we consider, is how much cash flow is being generated or expected to be generated from the portfolio in anticipation of, as Betty points out, the member contribution and employee contributions not meeting what I would call just the benefit payments and the outflows. We know we're modestly cash flow negative, which is, according to the actuarial information, is expected to increase over the coming years, and ensuring that there's sufficient yield in the portfolio to cover that. So in that case, what we want to avoid, as we've talked about, is that we're selling assets, that we're reducing the principal, the future earning power of the portfolio, especially as Lyle likes to point out, there is a timing element to that. We certainly don't want to be in a position where we're selling principal assets when marks are down and significantly impairing the earning power of the portfolio going forward.
Thank you. So this is where I've updated our measures. The first measure is still the same. The second measure becomes how much will we need in the future to finance benefits. And the third measure is now, should CERS use liability-driven investments options to fund a component of benefit payments in the future? So I think those are three good targets that we can try to research and consider I don't think today's a good time to identify targets because we need more background information. Investment management is such a big, important thing that I don't want to rush it to finish it just so we have something in place. So I'd like to do research on all of those before we get to another target. Let's go back to the question list. Is there another topic that grabs your attention as something that we really ought to put some emphasis in terms of a strategic option? Another of my favorite topics are, it comes to the monitoring and trying to manage our risk. Number 10, what are the key monitoring activities that the committee can use? Number 11, when I'm looking at monthly and quarterly investment reports, what is it that I'm looking for in those reports that give me critical information? From a personal standpoint, I look over at that since inception yield. It's been hovering close to 9%. I can remember when it was 9.5 to 9 3/4. I want to keep it close to 9%. I don't want it to have dives. So I also look for it to be fairly consistent. I also want it to be a lot higher than our discount rate, because I don't want to be trying to achieve that level of earnings to support the valuation of our actuarial liabilities. So those are some of the things that I look for in the monthly and quarterly reports. Let me open it up for some ideas from the rest of the group about what kind of strategic goal we might put in place for our monitoring risk management kind of activities.
No, it's what are we looking for?
Yes. And how can we manage that risk?
One of the things that's on my list that to some extent goes to managing risk. I think we need to get Wilshire to give us a really good overview of the best way to put together a formula to measure risk from that perspective. But the other thing, from a reporting standpoint, that I think we're going to have to spend a little time on soon, is with regard to the indexes that we are trying to track and whether they are appropriate for that particular asset class or not. And if so, what do we need to substitute in there?
I think we are making an adjustment right now, right?
We're making one, I think, particular, with regard to public equity.
Right. I think Steve suggested that, and I think we agree with it.
I don't think there's any question we're going to have to take a really close look at the one that we're using to track private equity.
Right.
For sure.
And basically, how can we track it?
Yeah, and I think particularly over the last few years, you're starting to see in the private sector different investment products put out there that are designed to track the private equity sector. So there ought to be better metrics to be able to do that, other than taking, a stock index and tagging on an extra 3 points. Then you got another issue with private equity, and that's just the data, the reporting time frames for that versus, public equity. It's instantaneous. Just pick up the phone and look at the market. So, reviewing those, and when you review them, then you got to make a conscious decision, and this is where Steve and his staff have got to come to the table, is if we are specifying a particular index, then to some extent we've got to manage towards that index. We can't be out doing something totally different than what makes that index up or not. That's probably up for discussion to some extent. But if they're going to be held accountable to to meeting or beating a particular index, they need to know what they're up against.
Right.
And whether it's appropriate or not appropriate.
Good point. And that's something we could ask Wilshire to.
I just think one of the goals we need to do is just a comprehensive review of what those indexes are and whether they meet our expectations. Or the better indexes to try to match.
We used to have a manager report to the investment committee where we focused on managers who had not met their benchmarks, what had been done in terms of conversations with those managers and what next steps might be. So the investment committee was reviewing manager performance at the same time that they were looking at total performance of the system. I always thought that was really good because we had reports in board books that gave us some very detailed background information on how managers were doing. And do we want to keep that manager? Do we want to give that manager more money? You know, we had those kinds of discussions in the investment committee. I think we should get back to that.
I would agree with that. I don't know that we need to, go through a complete review of them at every meeting, but it ought to be included in the reporting. And if somebody's got a question or an issue, and with one, we can bring it up and
I think you can give the manager performance data there, and then let the investment staff focus the committee's attention on those managers that are either high water or low water, 2 or 3 managers that deserve the committee's attention in terms of risk monitoring.
Interesting, okay.
So what I've done is I've gone down to objective C only because I already had this language in here for a placeholder about evaluating investment performance versus actuarial analysis and to strengthen risk monitoring. So measure 1 would be what are the benchmarks that are relevant for CERS. Measure 2, how do we monitor performance to ensure that managers are meeting performance goals. Anything else you want to add to that? We don't have to have 3. If 2 covers it, that's good.
Well, it seems to me, maybe what we're doing is, Ed mentioned needing a senior risk officer. We're kind of defining that position, aren't we? For the most part.
Yes.
This is what we would like that person, that professional to actually perform.
Yes.
And therefore would not be adding an additional load on our investment staff, but this would be.
some of those things can fall to the compliance officer, but the large majority certainly would fall to the risk officer.
Right. So maybe we're in the process of defining a position and those are responsibilities and working with Steve to determine, we're not overlapping, but also.
So we're talking about
Supplement.
a risk officer who's only focused on investments, or are we talking about a risk officer for KPPA to look at everything, all of our risks, because we've got risk everywhere?
I would look to the board for governance, but I understood it to be broad and not just investment focused.
We've got operational risk, we've got legal exposure risks, we've got, like I said, the compliance officer, if that's what they're doing and not doing it in something else, can take probably a third or more of this at a minimum to look at. Even the items you just mentioned with regard to reviewing manager performance, that can fall under, if they're not meeting their expectations, then they can highlight that when they bring it to our attention. So there's I wouldn't want to, given all the different things that a true risk officer ought to be looking at, I wouldn't want to overwhelm them just with investment.
Well, I think.
Yeah, that would be my concern. I think you need to manage risk from a variety of spots, and having one person who's responsible for managing all the risk, to me, from an operational standpoint, seems very tough to do, because you have to have somebody who's knowledgeable about benefit management, investments, finance management, and that kind of person doesn't exist. There's not one person that has all of those skills. Whereas your executive directors in each of his areas do have the skills to identify, here's the risk in my shop, and here's what we're doing to manage those risks. So I think you have to be careful
the
not
risk
to.
manager, to me, is why they've got to work closely with those department heads, because they may have risk exposure in one place that may be being mitigated in another department, or it may be getting magnified somewhere else.
Right.
So, you know.
And that's where his executive team collaboration
absolutely,
addresses that.
You know, but yeah, I think you still have to make use of the compliance officer more so with investment, because that's where their focus ought to be.
So would I can spell? Strengthen the role of the investment compliance officer to monitor investment risk. Is that where we're headed?
Or include investment.
Yes. The compliance officer ought to take the IPS and be checking it, I guess, what we've actually got going on. They ought to be able to recite that thing backwards and forwards.
Yeah, to me, it's more than just the data stuff that we've been getting here recently. It ought to be more robust than that.
Yep.
Anything else you want to add in this particular objective?
Anyone, any other suggestions? Okay.
Okay, let me go back to our list. Anything else on this question list that trip your trigger for an issue that you want to take to the top?
Anyone?
What's the burr under your saddle that we haven't talked about yet? Might be another way to ask the question. These were just things that keep me up at night and drive.
Those are good thought provoking.
But
What we come out of here as a draft here today, we need to take that and apply it against what we're putting in the IPS here in a few weeks. So, if it's not addressed in the IPS, we need to add something. If there's something in the IPS that not covered over here, maybe we'll add it to it. But those two things need to, one needs to kind of guide the other.
Good thought process. Yeah.
I think that is a good objective B. Let me go back to our template here.
In other words, syncing the IPS with the strategic plan, vice versa.
Because the investment policy statement is a key responsibility of the investment committee.
Probably the fundamental one.
Yes. So let's explore that one just a little bit. What measures could we add to this to put that synchronization in place?
I think a lot of things that we've already discussed need to go into issues with matching our tracking indexes, reporting issues that we've talked about, what we're going to see there, particularly with regard to individual managers and how they're. The IPS is a guideline, a track to run on. Some people like using the old bowling alley analogy. You got guardrails on each side, and that's really what the IPS is there for. But I think we paint broad enough strokes here with the strategic plan, refine it down a little bit more in the IPS, and then that gives us the track to run on. So I think you've got a lot of what needs to.
Bill?
Well, I'm suggesting some wordsmithing for you.
Okay.
I really think the objective is the investment policy statement meet best practices. I mean, we have what should be in an investment policy statement defined by professional organizations, and if we go through that review, then I think we're meeting not only fiduciary responsibilities but good governance, all the parts that we've got here in our goals.
Yeah, I think one of them that was mentioned somewhere, and going to what Bill just indicated with regard to benchmarks and that sort of thing. We need to see reporting on every manager, both internal and external. One of the things that I would like to see, I think Ed mentioned we're managing somewhere in the neighborhood of a third or more of our assets internally with 4 or 5 people. I'd be lying if I didn't say I didn't have a concern about that. That's an awful lot of assets for a small amount of people. I'd really be interested in seeing what the staffing is of other investment offices with similar assets, and looking at that. So I know Ryan's probably got that on his to-do list anyway, but I think that, you got to be a little leery of, if you lose somebody or 2 somebodies, where does that leave us? That's a risk issue, a big risk issue. So
we ought to have some language in the strategic plan about continuing monitoring staff requirements and adequacy and so forth, given our good point in terms of portion of our portfolio is going to be managed internally. There's a relationship there, certainly.
And we need to see reporting on their performance. You're looking at whatever a third would be, somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 billion, give or take, just counting CERS. They're managing money in the public equity sector, they're managing money in the special credit sector. We need to see separate performance numbers for each of those sectors, both for external managers and internal managers.
I would note that that's included in every IC and board material that we put together. Individual performance.
Sometimes you got to dig real deep to figure it out.
True, we can pull it out for sure, but I just wanted to make sure that it's noted that we do include that, including the appropriate benchmark for every portfolio, internal and external, in that quarterly IC book.
Just from a personal perspective, if we left out all the transaction detail and focused solely on performance, tell us what the managers are doing, tell us what the portfolio is doing, and there's a lot of detail that we put in that investment report that it's on the website, so trustees can go get it if they want that level of detail. But I think we could improve our use of those board book materials if it had less weedy details and more performance level details. The list of the security lending transactions, I know you guys do a great job about that. And if I ever wake up in the middle of the night worrying about it, I'll call you and ask. You don't need to put it in board books. So.
Well, I mean, could I make a suggestion on that? I mean, maybe we do spend some time on reports and how you want to see them. I mean, the reports are cumbersome, large, and, moving around, focusing, maybe not creating a ton of new data, just putting it in a format that you want to see it. That seems like that may be some worthwhile time.
Yeah, I've asked about looking at making that board package a little more efficient At one point, I was told that GASB requires us to put all that detail in there. They do not. So we can do any kind of reporting we want. And it's looking to the system that Steve has for what's easy to pull and without making a lot more work for them, as you just mentioned. And have the trustees say, this is a piece of information that I'd like to discuss on a periodic basis with the investment committee, so let's put it in the packet.
Yeah, and we can put the appendices, the cumbersome reports that go in an appendice, they don't have to disappear. You know, I think that could be time well spent.
I think you can leave them on the website, because I start to worry about how much data we're putting in board books. And when those folks are going to start saying, hey, you need to be paying more money for board books because you're putting so much data in there. So rather than putting it in as an appendices in board books, let's give trustees a link to the website publication, because all that detail is out there on the website. Let's don't publish it twice. Let's just go to one source and hit it one time.
What strikes me is that what we're talking about today in this meeting are things we ought to be talking about in our regular meetings.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I think the question is, how do we make the content of our regular meetings board relevant, as opposed to basically reviewing a lot of data. It's more than the human mind can absorb in terms of. So I mean, observations and takeaways are important.
And one of the things that it's easy to lose sight of sometimes, particularly when you're dealing with public funds, because people want to focus in on cost. I don't mind paying as long as we're getting performance. If we're not getting performance, we certainly don't need to be paying for it. Right? But the opposite is just as true. I don't want to save $1 million that cost us $100 million. That doesn't make sense either.
We're happy to work with the investment committee and the board to see, what reporting makes sense, what's most useful. Obviously, we're cognizant of your time and the amount of time you have to spend in meetings, so have it as focused to the information that you think is most important and be as transparent as possible. That's our objective.
And another objective I have there is to make it easier for the investment staff to get ready for the board books.
We all support that. Yes, thank you.
Because there's a lot of information going in there that, I've never used, and I can imagine, managing a packet for a meeting that other trustees are not using either. So
Is Sherry fist bumping or putting the back? See?
definitely make her job more easier.
Steve, if you'll reach out to me sometime when you have a minute,
Sure.
I'll share a site that might help you with that.
Happy to.
One thing that I'd like to suggest that we include in this Objective B section would be some discussion of the asset allocation, because that's another critical responsibility of the investment committee. And I think it links directly, it's included in the investment policy statement. So I think some sort of measure related to the asset allocation is worth talking about.
I think probably the first thing, and Dr. Hackford, we had discussions on that several times over the last year, is how often it needs to be reviewed. Number one, market conditions can dictate part of that, but I think you at a minimum need to be reviewing it every 3 to 5 years.
I think that's where we ended up, right?
Something to that effect needs to be. And then the other things that we've discussed, risk measures, things of that nature, those are the things to me that ought to be used to drive asset allocation. We can, if our target, I ask myself this question all the time. If we know, for example, based on actuarially, that if we generate a 6.5% return from now until 2049, we meet cash flow, we meet funding levels. If somebody walked in here today and said, all right, I've got your guaranteed investment at 6.5%, for that period of time, would we sink every dime we had into it? Should we? You know, you mentioned earlier, Betty, you know, we've got a 6.5% projected target return-wise, but historically we've averaged 9. We've been taking too much risk, too little risk, you know. All those drive asset allocation.
Or probably the projections that the actuaries were going with were not accurate.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, I'll leave that one to the actuarial committee.
Well, but the Wilshire report also said we're only going to get 7% out of public equities in the next 10 years. If that's what the U.S. economy gives us in the markets, then we got bigger problems than this unfunded liability. If public equities are going to drop to only 7% and private credit is going to be a yield that's higher, then that we got an economy issue to worry
Well,
about.
yes, but the nice thing about it is, you know, public equity's not dropping to 7% and interest rates are at 1. You know, if we'd been in that scenario, we'd really have a big problem. But that goes back to the earlier question, whether or not, you know, from an asset allocation standpoint, you know, whether we can purchase that income through some type of other vehicle that we're not currently using needs to come into play.
Mhm.
So all those things go hand in hand.
So what I've done here on objective B is we actually end up with 4 measures here, and I added measure number 3, evaluate the asset allocation and identify a key timeline for asset liability studies and risk management issues.
Do you want to put a timeline on that? That's why I will mention that.
If you want to, we can.
I think it would provide additional guidance.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something we ought to accomplish over at least the course of the next 12 months.
We could make that a target.
I don't know, is that a legitimate timeline?
Sure. Yes.
You know, we might ought to, but I you know, I think Dr. Hackford put it in a really good way earlier. You know, the idea of bucketing really appeals to me.
I can't move my. I've done something here and I want to undo it.
Lyle, could you repeat that last phrase? I didn't catch it.
I just simply said that I like Dr. Hackford's concept of bucketing.
Bucketing. Okay, that was the word I couldn't take.
From a
Couldn't understand.
financial planning perspective, you know, bucketing is really turned into one of the key metrics or tools used in long-term financial planning as a tool to be able to manage risk, particularly from an income standpoint for people that are either near or going into or already in retirement. And that's essentially what we're talking about here.
So we could have 2 targets under the asset allocation measure, conduct an asset liability study every 3 to 5 years.
Correct.
And include a risk analysis. Let me just put that in the same target. Including portfolio risk analysis. Does that make sense? That's one target we know.
Sure.
We can identify that one. Anything else we want to throw into objectives and/or measures? We've covered a lot of territory.
It's a big bite.
And I don't think we ought to have too long a list, you know, because the last piece of this is identifying a timeline for, what I had in mind is that we identify some key pieces under our goal, and then when we're gonna do that across this timeline, whether it's ongoing or we're gonna try to accomplish something by a specific date. So we can get to that later.
So
I would recommend that, you know, we take what you've produced there and let Ed maybe put in timeframes that he thinks are legitimate to be able to
Yeah.
accomplish. There's a lot of moving pieces there.
so if Ed, you
Yeah,
could polish
sure.
it up.
Certainly.
Right.
Let me go back to Bill for just a second. Objective B, I reworded that objective. Is that what you had in mind?
I did.
Because I do like that better than the way I worded it first time. Thanks for bringing that to the table.
So going forward, we'll have a polished version, which would come up next C meeting. Is that too soon?
Yes.
Does it
'Cause
need to go, does it need to, can you
Yeah,
have
that's
the
gonna be
polished
too soon.
version for the next investment committee meeting when we do IPS? For committee's approval and then we go to C?
Not,
Yeah,
I think
No,
next
that's-
C
that-
meeting's too soon.
Yeah, that
'Cause
probably is too soon.
When we look at objective A, there's some research that will take some time, and I don't want to try to get that done in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Just because I want to be sure that we have an analysis that gives us a solid foundation for picking some targets in that one. So I wouldn't want to rush that. And from that perspective, objective A will also slow us down on trying to pick timelines for this by year. So I think those timelines will come in after we identify targets in each of the objectives. And right now we only have one target that we feel comfortable establishing. So we've got more work to do. It might take another special meetings because your regular investment committee meetings have a lot of territory to cover.
Well, I think that's what's been happening over the last year. We've had strategic planning on the agenda,
Mm-hmm.
but
Keeps getting pushed off.
it gets pushed off. So I think this has been a very effective meeting.
Yes.
I think it's very useful. And Betty, thank you for suggesting it. So,
Oh, thank you. I would suggest in terms of a timeline going forward, October is a month that doesn't have a whole lot of meetings in it, so we could do a special, another one of these special meetings to talk about just strategic planning. And January is another one. If investments could nail down their strategic plan in October, then in January, we could have a special, and I'm looking at the chair of the board, we could have a special board meeting to talk about just strategic planning and refine the entire strategic plan for the CERS board. So we could
have
use
a
those.
strategic plan for the strategic
I
plan.
do. I'm an organizer. I got to get it on the calendar or it won't get done. So, and in the meantime, we'll try to set up a meeting with you and Mike and I to talk about that historical research that we need for Objective A. We might need GRS to give us a better angle on that data. And then if somebody could get with Steve to talk about refining the reporting. How much data do we really need in the monthly committee packet?
I think that's almost as part of our special meeting. I think if Steve could be here and we could just talk about that.
Okay.
I think that's going to involve a little brainstorming in
Yes.
terms of exactly what do the committee members really like
Okay.
to have and what's valuable. And I think you made a critical point there that's important to have.
So the homework
Content.
assignment for trustees would be to look at that packet for the August 28th meeting. How much of it are you using?
Or What
And-
do, or more fundamentally, what do we need?
Yeah, what would you like to use?
And, you know, it's kind of
Pare
like,
it down.
it's almost like supply and demand, you know.
Yep,
If we have a supply, is that really in demand? Then, in a sense, so we want to make that fit, so.
Yeah.
And our staff, so the staff are not wasting their time in terms of what, producing additional information that they're just producing information.
Yes.
I think also that can be useful in terms of the guidance we provide to our consultant in terms of what do we really need, what can be helpful to us, so forth, so. Yeah.
So I will distribute a draft of this strategic plan that we put together today, so each one of you
Sure.
will have that, and you can
And-
study on it.
And maybe you could include you laid out, I think, a pretty effective timeline.
Mm-hmm.
That would be
Do
helpful.
that,
to
I can
everyone.
put that in the email.
Stay coordinated. Anything else anyone else like to suggest or comment on? Well, with that, I think we will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, and thank you for Ed and Eddie for your work and hard work on it, and